Now, turning to something a little less less positive and chipper, I wanted to address the 900-pound gorilla in the room as well. The controversy surrounding Pope Francis's post-synodal exhortation, Amoris Laetitia. The document, especially paragraph 305, has been described by various priests and theologians, on EWTN and elsewhere as dangerous, very disturbing, very problematic, a big mistake, a direct contradiction of Pope John Paul's Familiaris Consortio, and so forth. First of all, Your Eminence, how authoritative is Amoris Laetitia? And then, are we talking merely about scandal here, or do these problematic paragraphs savor of heresy on some level?
Well, first of all, as I stated from the beginning, the very form of Amoris Laetitia and actually the words of the Pope within the document indicate that it's not an exercise of the papal magisterium, and the way the document necessarily is read, as with every document, is in the light of the constant teaching and practice of the Church. And so the statements in Amoris Laetitia, which are in accord with the Church's constant teaching and practice, certainly are very fine, but there are a number of statements that are at best confusing, and they must be clarified, and that's why four of us cardinals proposed, according to the classic practice of the Church, five questions, to the Holy Father, having to do with the very foundations of the moral life and the Church's constant teaching in that regard. And we, in presenting those dubia and asking those questions, it's clear that we believe that if they're not answered, there's great danger of a continued confusion in the Church, which is leading souls into error and with regard to the questions that have to do with their very salvation. So there certainly is the potential, without the clarification of these questions, there is a potential of scandal. With regard to the question of heresy, one has to be very attentive there with regard to material heresy and with regard to formal heresy. In other words, material heresy are there actual statements in the text which are formally materially heretical? Are they contradictory to the Catholic faith? The formal heresy is, did the person, namely the person of the Pope who wrote the document, intend to proclaim heretical teachings? The last thing I don't believe myself at all. Mm-hmm. And I think with regard to the first question, the language and so forth is confusing, and it's difficult to say that these confusing statements are materially heretical, but they need to be clarified, and to refuse to clarify them could lead people into error, into heretical thinking with regard to some very serious questions.
Given, if nothing does change and there is no clarification forthcoming, and then, since we're talking about the Church's teaching on the indissolubility of marriage, and given that marriage is already so embattled with rampant divorce and now even gay marriage, what do you foresee are the ramifications of Amoris, especially paragraph 305 and footnote 351, if no clarification comes, not only for the Church, but for the world? What happens if...
No, it would be very devastating. Recently I read a column by Russ Duthat in the New York Times commenting on an application of Amoris Laetitia in the Diocese of San Diego, and he simply and correctly states that if this interpretation of Amoris Laetitia be correct and acceptable, then the Church's teaching on marriage is finished. And we can't have that, of course, because that is the teaching It's the law which God wrote on the human heart from the very creation. It's the order, the law which Christ confirmed in his teaching in a most clear way, as is recounted in Matthew chapter 19, and to which he confers the grace of a Christian sacrament. And so the dubia have to be answered, the questions have to be answered in accord with the Church's tradition in order that the Church carry out her mission for the salvation of the world. If the Church were simply to accept the way of our culture with regard to marriage, then she will have betrayed herself and betrayed her Lord and Master.
Mm-hmm.
And that we just simply can't permit.
Now, in a private letter on September 5th to the bishops of Buenos Aires, Pope Francis wrote that, quote, "There are no other interpretations of amoris other than one admitting divorced and remarried Catholics to Holy Communion in some cases." He's so adamant about this, Your Eminence. So, I don't know, is it even possible for you to envision a scenario whereby you suddenly discover that you're missing something or the four cardinals are misinterpreting and that you'd have to concede that you're wrong? I mean, if it's not possible, then what is the point of the dubia? Do you not already have a fairly good understanding what the answers are to your 5 questions?
Well, certainly we do. But the important thing is that the pastor of the Universal Church, in his office of guardian of the truths of the faith and the promoter of the truths of the faith, that he make clear that yes, he answers these questions in the same way that the Church answers them. And so what he wrote in the letter simply means that this is his personal understanding of the matter, but that letter hardly could be considered an exercise of papal magisterium. Mm-hmm. And so it's a painful situation in which to be involved, but we simply have to press forward to clarify the matter.
Your Eminence, in this age of dialogue, Pope Francis himself has called for open discussion of a number of doctrinal questions, and he said that the thinking of pastors and theologians, if they're faithful and honest and realistic and creative, would actually help to achieve greater clarity. So my question for you is, what can be inferred from his decision not to dialogue with you in your quest for that very clarity on this fundamental point of moral theology?
Well, I think, to put it plainly, people have accused we four cardinals have accused us four cardinals of disrespect for the papal office, of an inimical attitude toward the Pope, and this is not the case at all. We are cardinals. We have a very serious responsibility to assist him, and for that reason, we brought to his attention these 4 questions, which remain in a document which bears his signature, and we can't do otherwise, and mm-hmm. the Church can't do otherwise, and so the matter will have to be resolved. Certainly, conversation, as we've initiated it by raising the dubia, and when we were informed that there would be no response to the dubia, then we knew we had to bring the conversation before the whole Church, because so many faithful, so many priests and bishops are expressing a great confusion in this matter, and also are recounting how divisions are setting up. There are divisions in various parts of the Church between bishops, between priests and mm-hmm. and lay faithful on fundamental teachings of the faith. Well, that's the work of the devil. The Holy Spirit generates unity and a daily conversion of life to Christ that helps us to overcome our sins and to live in accord with the truth. And so this division, this confusion, has to be addressed and remedied. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
No, it absolutely does, and obviously, it seems to us as lay people looking on that that's your job, that's your duty before God.
in fact, some people have said to me, "Well, why did you publish these Gubbio? You wrote them to Pope. You should have been satisfied." I said, "No, that's not sufficient, because everywhere I travel a lot now. Everywhere I go, people are saying, 'Well, what's wrong with you cardinals? You don't. There are these serious questions, and you remain silent. You don't say anything.'" And they're correct. If we were to remain silent, it would most definitely give the idea to the faithful that everything's fine, and it's not fine.
It's not fine. Now, this idea that it could even escalate to the point where you would lose your cardinal rank, that you don't believe that, do you? Is that within the realm of possibility that it could go that far?
I don't even think about it. I mean, certainly it's possible. It's happened historically that a cardinal has lost the title of cardinal. I don't think about it because I know what my duty is, and I can't be distracted from it by these kind of thoughts, worrying about whether I'm going to be in some way persecuted for defending the truth. As I said to one person who said to me, "Aren't you afraid to insist on these matters?" And I said that what I'm afraid of is to have to appear before our Lord at the Last Judgment and to have to say to him, "No, I didn't defend you when you were being attacked, and the truth that you taught was being betrayed." And so that's as far. I just don't give it any thought.
Well, what you just said, Your Eminence, is something I pray becomes contagious in the life of the Church at the highest levels. But I'm sure that you have a lot of support, and in fact, in expressing their support for you and the other three cardinals, a number of high-ranking, high-profile pastors and academics and professors and so forth, both here and in Europe, signed a letter of support a few weeks ago in which they pointed out that as a result of the widespread confusion and disunity following the promulgation of Amoris, the Universal Church is now entering a gravely critical moment in her history that, according to them, shows alarming similarities with the great Arian crisis of the 4th century. And I'm curious to know, do you agree? Do you think this has the potential to escalate into something similar to the Arian crisis?
Well, it does in this sense that as long as a confusion spreads more and more about a fundamental truth of the faith. Now, in the case of the Arian crisis, it had to do with the two natures in the one person of our Lord Jesus Christ. But here we're dealing also with a very fundamental truth, two fundamental truths really, the truth about holy matrimony and the truth about the Holy Eucharist. And if this confusion doesn't stop, we will have a situation where you have within the Church large bodies of people who don't believe the Catholic faith, as, for instance, St. Ambrose encountered when he became Bishop of Milan. And so, no, it's a serious matter, and I don't think that they're being extreme by making that observation. I don't think they're being extreme at all.
Mm-hmm. Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who seems to be sort of your wingman at this point, supporting you, thanks be to God, in his letter of support to the four cardinals, he speaks of what he calls intolerant reactions to your dubia, and he points out that the four cardinals have been really castigated as witless, naive, schismatic, heretical, and even comparable to the Arian heretics. So this has to be hurtful to you, obviously, Your Eminence, but what has gone wrong in the Church when a simple quest for clarity on a matter of morality and doctrine is met with such a visceral reaction on the part of members of the hierarchy even? What has gone wrong?
Well, I'll tell you what I think has gone wrong, and that is the very worldly, a very mundane way of thinking has entered into the life of the Church, and the Church is which sees the church as divided into political parties and so forth, and instead of being unity of all Catholics, unity in Christ. And this worldly way of thinking then permits people to engage in this kind of intemperate and ridiculous ad hominem approach. The dubia are stated very respectfully. They're very honest questions, and they merit an honest reply. And these, what I see in these intemperate reactions is a sign that the people who don't want to answer the dubia, in fact, realize that they're not on solid ground. They can't answer the dubia correctly, and so they try to discredit the persons who raise the questions, who raise the dubia. I mean, it's an old human reaction, but it's mundane, it's secular, it has no place in the church.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's next, Your Eminence? If Pope Francis fails to answer your dubia, what's the next course of action? I know you've spoken of the possibility of elevating this to a formal correction, but what exactly does that look like? Well,
it doesn't look too much differently than the dubia. In other words, the questions, the truths that seem to be called into question by Amoris Laetitia would simply be placed alongside what the church has always taught and practiced, as that's enunciated in the official teaching of the church, and in this way, these errors would be corrected.
I see. Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a little off topic, but I was in Rome covering the Synod last year, and I noticed that there's this constant theme now throughout in this idea of accompaniment, the Church of accompaniment. As though the Holy Mother Church didn't know how to accompany the sinners in the past. That part of it confused me, but also it seemed to be going further. Cardinal Peter Turkson, for example, he assured us in the Vatican press office that at the next Synod of the Church, this Church of accompaniment would address gay unions. And I'm wondering, do you foresee change coming even in the way this pontificate accompanies those who are in gay unions? And is it possible that next year at this time we might be discussing dubia on a post-synodal exhortation that appears to approve the gay lifestyle? Is that forthcoming?
Well, this notion of accompaniment certainly is not, has no classic theological or doctrinal value, or meaning, I should say, not value, and it certainly doesn't justify calling into question moral truths, especially regarding acts that are always and everywhere evil. And I mean, if accompaniment is understood in that way, you're quite correct. It could lead us into all kinds of very damaging, very confusing, damaging discussions. But I think that this false notion of accompaniment, as it has manifested its harmful effects in the discussion on the situation of those who are in irregular matrimonial unions, will lead us to either clarify what accompaniment means, or to abandon the use of that category. This goes back to the relationship of faith to the culture, and the faith, we're called by our faith to encounter the culture, but we encounter the culture with the truths of the faith and call it to a transformation. In other words, to conform itself ever more to the truth which God has written in nature itself, and in particular upon the human heart. But if that notion of encountering the culture is not theologically informed, not understood correctly, the church begins to look like it's running after the culture. In other words, that it's trying to mimic the culture. Mm-hmm. Now, if the culture were perfectly Christian, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be correct, but it wouldn't be harm done. But we're living in a culture which is anti-life, anti-family, anti-religion, and to get the impression that the church endorses such a culture, I mean, this is folly.
Yes. Yeah, it seems like that. I mean, the Holy Father referred to, or he admonished priests against turning the confessional into a torture chamber. But it seems like right now, more than ever before, this culture, which is so Christophobic, if you will, needs to hear the voice of Mother Church in a way that's corrective, maybe not so much accompanying, but I guess what I'm saying is the act of trying to correct and help the sinner, isn't that the ultimate way of accompanying the sinner?
Exactly right. And that's all done with charity. I mean, we don't approach people shaking our finger or screaming at them or acting hysterically. Our faith makes us serene, but it also makes us firm and steadfast. And so we address the culture with the truth of the moral law and the truth which Christ himself teaches us. And actually, in truth, that's what the culture really desires. The culture has no respect for a church which simply says to it, "Oh, everything is just fine," and endorses it. The culture expects the church to address it with a challenge. And oftentimes, I thought of it in terms of the relationship of parents with children. When children are misbehaving, when children need to be corrected and guided, if parents simply coddle them and say, "Oh, you're just fine, that's all right," the children they grow up in a very disordered way and have great problems, and the children don't respect their parents for that. But
yeah, I could tell you, Your Eminence, as the father of 7 children, I don't accompany my children so much as I love them and correct them when it's needed.
Exactly, and so I mean, even as a teacher, I've corrected students and had them scream at me, "I hate you," and I know I had parents tell me that a child, runs out of the room saying, "I hate you," but ultimately, that child, that young person, will be so grateful for the correction received. It may not be immediate gratitude, but that's what the important thing is, that we have a view of eternity and of the eternal good of the child, and even also the eternal destiny of the culture, and then act accordingly.
Right. Your Eminence, Catholics have been through a lot over the past decade with the priest scandal and the abdication of Pope Benedict and this rather unconventional pontificate of Pope Francis, and now this. I know we're running a little low on time here, so what is your advice for faithful lay Catholics if Pope Francis should continue to not answer your dubia?
My advice is this, and it's inspired by the truth, the reality that Christ is alive for us in the Church, in her teaching, in her sacraments, her life of prayer and devotion, and in her discipline. And that advice is this: to continue to steep yourself in the knowledge of the faith and the knowledge of Christ as he is alive for us in the Church, by studying the Catechism of the Catholic Church and other expressions of the Church's constant teaching. For example, the Apostolic Exhortation Familiaris Consortio of St. John Paul II, and then continue to deepen your participation in the sacred liturgy and prayer life at home and devotional life, and at the same time strive to conform your life ever more through the truths of our faith, following the Church's moral teaching, the teaching of the moral law as that's upheld in the Church, and her discipline. In this way, today in the prayer for after the post-communion prayer, we prayed in the ordinary form that we would be torches to welcome Christ by our witness to his truth and love, and that's what we ought to be concerned about. And if we do that, we'll be encouraged, and we won't let ourselves get worn down by the the great difficulties through which we're passing.
Mm-hmm. Your Eminence, I was born in 1966, so basically a child of the Second Vatican Council era, and I all my life it seems like there's been a pattern of gradual diminishing of sacred tradition and replacing it with something new. A community of the hand, or altar girls, or easy annulments, and now this. Pope Francis describes himself as one who is acting in faithful accord with the true spirit of the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council. And I'm wondering, is there any concern in your mind that what we're seeing now is in fact the following of some sort of continuum of that spirit of Vatican II that has less to do with Francis and more to do with a new orientation of the Catholic Church altogether?
That is a legitimate concern. Whenever I hear this language, the spirit of Vatican II, I am immediately alerted, because there's no question, it's been demonstrated and can be demonstrated more, that a lot of what happened in the Church after the Second Vatican Council, which invoked the Second Vatican Council, had nothing to do with what the Council Fathers taught. I mean, we saw it in the devastation of the sacred liturgy and in other aspects as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think that what we must do is return to the constant teaching of the Church as it's expressed in the Second Vatican Council, but in all of the ecumenical councils and in all of the authentic teaching of the Church down the centuries. And only when Catholics are well steeped in the teachings of the faith are they going to be prepared to give the witness which is needed today, and also will they be prepared to be strong members of the Church and to keep the Church strong. And we're suffering today from decades of poor catechesis or no catechesis at all, mm-hmm. and all of that is reaping its effects. But we have the tools to address it, and we need to use them. And I see a lot of signs of people who are really want now to know their faith, and they're deepening their knowledge of the faith, and they want the sacred liturgy to really be what it is, the encounter of heaven with earth in all its beauty, and who are also deeply concerned to lead a good and moral life.
Mm-hmm. Last question, Your Eminence. If you could say something that would help me out. We're members of the Catholic Press, of course, and there are many members of the Catholic Press that support you and the three cardinals. But we want to be part of your solution. We don't want to be a part of the problem. So what can you say to us? What do you want us to say as this dramatic dubia situation unfolds? And is there something that you would rather we didn't? In other words, what's the best thing that we can do to help you in this position that you're in right now?
I think the best thing that you can do to help, and the number of you have been doing it, is simply to print the truth, but in a serene way, to maintain absolute respect for the Church in all her aspects, including the Petrine office, which is essential to our life in the Church, but at the same time to speak clearly the truth, but in a loving way. And if you do that, as I say, a number of you have been doing, that will really be helpful. We don't want to contribute to the division by taking a very aggressive and outspoken approach, which will divide people and will cause people who don't understand all of what's going on to be scandalized. That we want to avoid. But I think if you express the truths of our faith in this serene and loving way, that will help everybody, including those who may not yet understand the difficulty that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Your Eminence, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to answer this. I think it goes without saying that we're all praying for you, and we're so grateful for the stand that you've taken. And if there's anything ever, at any point, that the Catholic Press can do here to help you out, let us know. And please be assured of our support and prayers as you move forward.
Well, thank you. Keep praying for me. I'm really grateful for it. And And I've really enjoyed talking with you this morning.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.